Hello and welcome to the latest episode of the Unpaid Interns. Austin Render here with you on Wednesday, September 9th. Hope you all had a fantastic Labor Day weekend. We took Monday off to observe the holiday, but we are back in full force today. Returning guest Brody Miller of The Athletic will be joining us from down in Baton Rouge. We'll be talking some LSU football, some college football in general. It's a sport that has no certainty in it right now. That is the certainty, is that there is no certainty in college football here in Bloomington. We don't know when we will see college football, but down in Baton Rouge, theoretically, they're supposed to see it at the end of the month. So we'll talk to Brody Miller about what he knows about the upcoming college football season. Friday, we have Brian Bennett, also from The Athletic, a college basketball writer. He'll be joining us to talk about the uncertainty of college basketball and what they are looking to do. Bubbles are starting to emerge. The NCAA feels like that might be the best way to go. We'll see where they start positioning those bubbles as we get closer and closer to go time. Let's talk about some of today's headlines. Last night, LeBron James became the all-time winningest postseason player in the NBA, passing Derek Fisher with 162 postseason wins. I mean, that's impressive. He's literally in the conference finals almost every year. So I don't think anyone's surprised by this. I'm kind of surprised that Derek Fisher was the number one player on this list. But nonetheless,
hey, how's it going, man?
LeBron is in. Hey, there's Brody Miller joining us. Brody, what's up, man?
I can't hear you. Sorry, 1 second.
Oh, all right, Brody, working on some technical issues there. Just let me know when you can hear me. We'll just keep going here. Von Miller appears to have serious ankle damage, likely to miss the entire 2020 season. That's a big loss for the Broncos, big loss for the NFL, honestly. Von Miller, one of the best players out there in the NFL, one of the better guys in the NFL as well. And before we get to anything, we do have less than 3 weeks in the MLB season. Important. That kind of snuck up on me with the way that this season has gone by so quickly. As it stands right now in the AL East, the Rays and the Blue Jays would be the two playoff teams, leaving the Yankees and the Red Sox. The Red Sox are way out of it. Yankees have dropped to 500. It looks like neither one of them will make it if it ended right now. AL Central, the Indians and the White Sox have a half-game lead right now on the Twins. So that one's a 3-horse race in the AL Central. In the AL West, the Athletics have the lead. Astros are second. Mariners still trying to make up some ground there. In the NL, the Braves and the Phillies have it in the NL East, but the Marlins are right on their tail. In the NL Central, Cubs have a lead on the Cardinals. Cardinals would get the second spot over the Brewers and the Reds. And the NL West, Dodgers and the hot Padres at 27-17 have a large lead on first and second there in the West. Brody, can you hear me now?
I can. I'm so sorry about that.
No,
Can you hear me?
You're good. I'm glad we got that worked out. Let's go ahead and get things started with you. I guess my first question, because you're in a place that, and I'm always fascinated by this, that football just means a little bit more than where we are here in Bloomington. Is there a sense in the air, or a buzz in town of, okay, football's close?
You know, the honest answer to that's not the fun answer, is it's hard to get any kind of buzz in 2020 because there's no walking around. There's no seeing what the local place is like. But I know still get your question. I do think there's a buzz, of course. There's an excitement. Things are just maybe even excitement just for the fact things are slowly getting back to normal a little bit around here. But I mean, there's obviously a slight reduction in it. I think there's a little bit less. There's still going to be a very large portion. I mean, the majority are still in my mentions, freaking out about the third string offensive guard and whether they think that, things like that. So that's a good sign that people are still. And there's also the part of people who are just kind of why does this matter this year, all years? But overall, yeah, I think I'm starting to see that Louisiana obsession back a little bit.
Well, let's get some of the negative or the tougher questions out of the way here first. Questions you may not have all the answers to, but stuff that's going on. And then we'll get into an LSU preview as we go on. But I mean, there's coaches out there in the SEC starting to say, look, this may not be possible. I mean, Tennessee, I believe, had 44 players out for their inter-squad scrimmage. What's the status right now of LSU and of SEC football here just a couple weeks away?
Yeah, I mean, it's tricky. I mean, you've already seen, I think, maybe double-digit postponements across college football so far of games, which is something we all were ready for, but also something that I don't, that's not a good sign that we're not even a week into the Power Five or anything like that. But in LSU's case, they obviously had a big outbreak in the spring from of upwards of 20 to 30 guys quarantined, and I think positive cases in the teens. And then, things seem pretty solid. Ojan consistently said they didn't have any outbreaks. And then about 2 weeks ago, there was an outbreak on the offensive line, which, we don't know the exact number of positives, but basically all but 4 LSU offensive linemen were at least quarantined because of positive cases and exposure. So that's kind of that's the specific nightmare scenario. I think it's not like there's ever going to be some 80% outbreak. It's the fact that you might lose an entire position group. Oklahoma had something pretty similar about a month ago too, where first off, from just a practice point of view, well, that was like a week and a half where LSU just didn't have an offensive line. It was basically doing glorified 7-on-7. But on top of that, I mean, yeah, if there was a game next week, that week, they would not have been able to play it. I don't think so. I think I'm pretty sure the SEC requirements are you need, is it 5 or 6 or something like that offensive lineman healthy. So, I mean, that's kind of the fear. And I think obviously right now, I think everything is relatively stable. I don't think there's, at least not that I've heard about yet, another outbreak. And right now, most of the team is practicing. But, that's something we definitely got to watch. And then you have the Tennessee situation. And there's things like this popping up where, I mean, I'm still optimistic they're going to play because I just think the SEC is just going to roll on and adjust however needed to and take what it can get. But my optimism was it's dipping, like 5 to 10% per week, just in terms of how this is all really going to work on a week-to-week basis.
Well, the Big Ten's getting a lot of slack for what they've done, and granted, they have handled it probably very poorly. But they canceled early. August 11th was when they decided to go out with it, and it kind of felt like, okay, we're going to cancel, and everyone else is going to follow us, and only the Pac-12 followed them. I guess on the flip side, then, is the SEC getting any slack for still going? Is there anything that's like, and I bet not in the South. I mean, football is king there, but is there anyone who's like, man, this is really ridiculous that they're still trying to do this?
Yeah, it's a good way to frame it, actually. And honestly, I mean, I haven't seen a ton. There's your Twitter people. I mean, there's like a few LSU people too who are like, why are we doing this? This is stupid. But like in the real, actual relevant criticism way, the way like the Big Ten gets it, from every major media person and everything, not really. And I think that goes in the sense of, I mean, I'm not saying right or wrong their decision. I actually don't know how I feel on a day-to-day basis. It changes. But in just the sense of, I'll give them credit for, they just said, hey, we're going to gather as much information as we can, not rush a decision for something late September. And, I'm criticizing the Big Ten here, Kevin Warren, but I think that's the part that I think has proven to be slightly prudent because things are changing every week. So you should never make a decision 2 months ahead during this pandemic because, well, look at, about a week after they announced, and I'm not even sure it's going to mean much. The Yale, test came out, which, is much cheaper at home testing and whatnot. And there's all these advancements coming out every few weeks. Then you start wondering, would that have altered their decision if they knew back then? So I think in that sense that no one's really criticizing the SEC because they're kind of just, things are going as they go. And you are going to see your vocal minorities that are pretty, this is pointless. But overall, I haven't felt that.
It is interesting. I mean, and I just think of like the voice of major media in terms of SEC as Paul Feinbaum. And that's probably generic and cliche. But I think like pre-August 11th, he was just leading the campaign for no football, no football. Big Ten makes the decision, no football. And now he's like the biggest anti-Big Ten guy out there. Like, how could you have possibly canceled football? It's crazy.
That's a good point. Yeah, I think one thing we've learned through this entire year is that the hills you are willing to die on can change very quickly based on interests or just who you want to be on the side of. In all honesty, I feel like that's been the fascinating thing of you listen to who you want to listen to and things like that, and things can change quickly. But at the same time, benefit of the doubt, my opinion's changed 19 times in the last 7 months. So I guess, but I'm with you. Yeah.
Yeah, I got my next question was going to be something you kind of answered, but like, what's your stance on the Big Ten and the way they've handled this and the buzz they're getting? I mean, it's hard to argue they've handled it well, but it's really interesting. Obviously, being in the heart of it here in Bloomington and the criticism they're getting. What have you thought as an outsider?
Well, first off, like you said at the beginning, the big thing you have to criticize is the way they've handled it, the way they've done communication on it. I mean, it's a new commissioner, of course. Nothing's going to go seamless and things like this, and it's the hardest situation I can ever imagine a new commissioner having to deal with. But no, I mean, they haven't handled it well, and I'm not even sitting here saying they made a terrible decision. I think at the time they made that decision, there was a lot of momentum going that way, and nobody was really like, well, a lot of people were angry, but like, I think a lot of smart people kind of got it. But then as more information's come out, it's like, myocarditis paper was a big part of that apparently for them in the Pac-12, right? But you talk to SEC people, you talk to, I've talked to a good amount of like Conference USA people or, American people. And it's like, this is all stuff they knew in March. This is things they've been testing for since, May. And I think it's kind of like, what is that why? Well, they've actually been on top of this. So I think it's a tricky thing, but then at the same time, you see like the offensive line situation, or you see the Tennessee situation. You're like, are they that wrong? Are we kind of pushing for pretty messed up reasons? I'm not even ready to criticize the decision yet. I just think they've butchered the handling, which is not an original take. I think that's most people's.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's where we all stand right now. Let's go back to the SEC a little bit. Let's focus in for a sec on LSU. What do they have in place in terms of precautions for players, for coaches, trying to keep them safe? And what are maybe some game day operations going to look like?
Yeah, so we're still figuring out game day operations. They're one of the only teams in the SEC that haven't fully announced what their attendance plan is, but the governor does seem like he's leaning toward 25,000 people in the stands, which is about 25% basically. So there's that. But yeah, in terms of overall precautions, I mean, they're testing, I believe, 3 times a week. They're doing pretty extreme contact tracing throughout the building and like, checking temperatures and whatnot throughout there. And then the new thing, which I wrote about last week, was, I mean, you've probably read plenty about the splash shields, right? With helmets that are basically like masks for a helmet. But the reviews have been pretty bad because players can't breathe in them, especially in the South. It's literally like you're putting a bag over their head, and most teams have stopped using them. Well, one kind of really interesting thing is LSU has basically developed this helmet. It's basically like a cooling helmet. And it is basically with a battery-powered fan, like that's like light. It's a matter of ounces, so it's not adding much weight. And it's connected in the dead space of the helmet. And it basically like just sprays cool air on their face with the splash shield. So if anything, they actually feel more refreshed even than like a normal fall without a splash shield. So it kind of sounds like, from what I'm hearing, this actually could be like a bit of a game changer with helmets and whatnot. And I mean, I know several NFL teams are about to buy some. I know a lot of major Power 5 teams are about to buy some. So that's a really interesting one because it allows them, one, to use the splash shields without players, not being able to breathe, but two, like the feedback they're getting so far is that players actually like are able to practice, stay, at top condition longer because they're cooler. You're seeing like players actually fight over it. So that's not even quite what you were asking, but that's just one thing I want to throw out that I thought was really interesting.
No, that's great. Brody Miller joining us here from The Athletic. New helmets coming out here. Breaking news here from Brody Miller. What might your job look like this fall? I mean, do you know anything about whether or not you'll be allowed on the grounds? Will you be working remotely? A lot of Zoom interviews. What could your future hold?
Yeah, well, a lot of Zoom interviews for sure. I mean, basically we're at a point where I think we're getting Osher on just once a week, and we've, via Zoom for like 20 minutes, and we've gotten players once 3 weeks ago and haven't gotten them since, and LSU never allows assistance. So not a lot of, access and things like that. Obviously no practice access, but I mean, the way I view situations like this is usually like these situations where access are restricted, creative people can actually do cooler stuff. And I really think that's because I think when you get in that, that thing where you're just like access coverage and I'm writing on what the player said during interviews, you write the stories that are the same as everyone else because everybody has the same quotes. So they're pretty boring stuff. So, I mean, I'm trying to use this as a chance to just actually like write stuff I'm more interested in writing half the time. And like, you hear some weird comment a player made or a coach made. Well, like, all right, I'm going to go chase this, I'm going to go do some interviews and see something different, and then game coverage is the big thing. It sounds like I'm probably going to be going to home games, and I don't really think I'll go to many, if any, away games because One, is it safe? Two, we don't know how many people are going to be allowed in games. And three, the chances are we're going to be going to an away game, traveling and spending money just to go get post-game Zoom interviews that we would have gotten at home. So as much as I want to go, it doesn't seem like it's very smart, but we're still seeing the situation there. So again, that's another example where like, I think you can get creative with that. You can do some cooler stuff, or like, shoot, there's some home games I might not go to because I might find somewhere else cooler to go and write a story from the game. And granted, with The Athletic, I have a different job description that gives me a little more freedom, and I don't have to write a classic immediate news gamer from that game. My job is just to write a good story from that day. So, for example, like the first Saturday of the season, I assume there's going to be no tailgating at Tiger Stadium, which I feel pretty confident saying of every school in the country that probably matters the most that there isn't tailgating. And I think I know some of the tailgaters and people who lead the really big ones. And I think on the first Saturday of the season, I'm probably going to go to they're going to have like an at-home tailgate in their backyard. And so I'm going to go write a story from there and watch a game with these like people tailgating at home that would normally be at a game. That's an example of just trying to think differently, because I think that's the only way to survive in a pandemic sports writing world, is just be a little different.
Where have you seen your creativity show the most here in the past couple months? Maybe a story or just an idea you had that you're like, okay, that was creative. You kind of had, like you said, been forced to think outside the box here.
Yeah, it's a good question. I don't know. Like one just kind of weird one that pops up is like, we tracked down the guy who made the GoFundMe 3 years ago to fire Ed Ogeron after they lost to Troy week 4. And it was like, and that was a big story in 2017. He was a new coach, just lost to Troy at home, and it was a big thing. And obviously then that coach went on to win the national championship and be named coach of the year. So we tracked down the guy who made the GoFundMe, and it was like, I'm like, oh, this could be a fun little thing. It ended up being like fascinating. It was a LSU grad who lives in Dubai and is like a tech guy who just like basically made it drunkenly as a joke at 5 a.m. because that's the time he was at in Dubai. And like, it was just kind of wild. That was a fun one. I think that was just kind of out there. Or even just, it's just figuring out how to use your time in ways to differentiate yourself. For example, like, this isn't fun or necessarily creative, but like I use this chance without a lot of normal sports to really dive into reporting a deeper story on, I don't know if you remember Carly McCord, Steve Ensminger's daughter-in-law, who died in a plane crash on the way to the Peach Bowl, the college football playoff. Well, she was a sports reporter, big Louisiana figure, and I spent 3 months just embedded with her family and really like basically like, how have you been grieving for the last 9 months, and kind of did a long story on that. And I think that's an example of just take advantage of your time. Don't just be sitting there like, I don't have sports. What am I going to do right now? Who's going to step up through the pandemic story or something like that? No. So I think that's just, I don't have as many like fun, creative examples off the top of my head, but I think it's just kind of using your time differently.
That's why I love The Athletic. They give you guys the freedom to do that stuff. And
yeah, I was going to say, I am very spoiled. Yeah.
We've had a couple athletic writers on. They're all very creative like you. I did want to ask before we went too into it, I totally spaced it, but the news coming out of Oklahoma this week that they don't want to release COVID numbers because they think it might be an advantage for other teams. Where do you stand on this? It sounds like they're getting a lot of backlash in the media for this.
Yeah, I understand both sides technically, but yeah, it's silly. They're using HIPAA and all these privacy laws to be like, we can't release information for these people. And it's like, nobody is asking for specific names. We are not asking for this player is out. We would not do that. It is, well, you just want to know how many cases are going on, or how many people are quarantined, things like that. Those are what we want to know. That is not, as far as most lawyers I've heard from, at least, it's not a HIPAA protected concept. So, or, FERPA or whatever law you want to use. So I'm still learning which ones are which. So yeah, I think it's kind of silly. And I mean, LSU is the same way on this for the most part. I think the university is releasing numbers, but athletics is not. And a lot of major schools are like this. And I think it's silly. And I don't think it's them being like inept and not realizing the difference. It's them just clinging to anything they can use to withhold information. I mean, these guys are smart people who know how to limit information whenever they can. So I think it is frustrating. And then, one counter I saw on Twitter mentions, which I don't know why I let myself listen to Twitter mentions, but it was a decent
dark rabbit hole to go down
I know. But it was actually a decent counter, and they were like basically saying, okay, well, if they tell you 8 players are, 3 players are positive this week and not practicing, and you notice 3 players aren't at practice, like you're going to put that together. And it's like, that is a decent counter. And that's something that you have to like factor in. I think that is interesting. I guess my counter to that would be there's so much in and out on a football practice on a day-to-day basis that like there might be 12 guys out of a practice with like an ankle issue or a shoulder issue or whatever. So I don't know if it's like there will only be 3 players and we'd immediately know that. And I'm going down a tangent here, but it's just like, yeah, I think overall it's BS, but what are you gonna do?
Let's go back to the SEC. Obviously, an all-conference schedule. How does that favor anyone, if it does, in the SEC in terms of not getting those cupcake Troy cupcake games or whatever, and you just play each other?
I'm trying to think of who like would just from the concept alone would benefit. Nobody's like necessarily coming to mind. I'm trying to think of it would probably benefit. I mean, it hurts like your A&Ms, for example. And A&M is probably the best example of who gets hurt by this. And Florida comes to mind too. But A&M, because A&M has had, I think, just flat out the toughest schedule in college football for the first 2 years of the Jimbo Fisher era. I mean, they were brutal. Their non-conference team was always Clemson. They had Bama as their cross-division one year. I think they had Georgia the other year as their cross-division. So, like, they just had they played, I think it was last year, they played like 4 different teams who were ranked number 1 at some point in the country. So, and this year they have I think they have a chance to be a really good team. And they're really experienced. Jimbo's in year 3. He's been recruiting like crazy. And they finally have not a cupcake schedule, but a really manageable schedule where, like, if it was still a normal year, they were going to go, they should have started 10-0, and then they'd end with LSU and Bama. And, oh yeah, never mind, I made a mistake earlier, but forget that. And they would have ended with LSU and Bama. And sure, they might have lost those 2, but still, like, this was going to be a really big year for A&M. And now their schedule adds, I think, Florida and another like half decent team, maybe Kentucky. So it's like they just went from like finally having their year to really capitalize to like, shoot, I don't know anymore. And then Florida's another one where like their schedule just went from, I mean, yeah, they lost a decent non-conference, I forget who, but then they add A&M and they had another pretty good team. So those are the real losers. I mean, the biggest winner, if we're being completely honest, is LSU. And they got the biggest cupcake of a schedule I think you could ever imagine. I mean, it was kind of wild. It was, first off, the 2 conference teams that got added were Vanderbilt and Missouri. So 2 of the 3 worst teams you could play. And it's even more than that. It's like they have a brand new quarterback, brand new offense, so much unknown, and they open the season with 3 cupcakes, basically like a 3-week preseason. They start with Mississippi State, who's not going to be very good this year, Vanderbilt, and Missouri before they play Florida. So Miles Brennan and this new offense and all these new pieces get like a 3-week warm-up, which is the most important thing. They're going to be 3-0 going to Florida. And then on top of that, like most teams, they probably have 4 like marquee games, right? You got Florida, Auburn, A&M, and Alabama. It's 4 brutal games, but none of them are back-to-back, which is wild because everyone else in the SEC entirely, you look at their schedule, everyone has like at least like a 3-game gauntlet or at least a 2-game gauntlet where it's like, man, that's hell for a few weeks. They don't even have a 2-game one. They have none back-to-back. There's always like an in-between bye or like, Ole Miss or something. So it's kind of crazy how I remember I asked one administrator off the record and they were like, it's like they were in my head. This was exactly what they wanted. So in terms of winner, I think LSU ranks pretty high. Granted, LSU just lost so much, especially this past month. I don't think they're going to be competing for an SEC title necessarily, but still, they're a big winner.
I'd have to think a lot of the East teams are the ones that were hurt by this because their side is weaker, and now they add more of the West to it. I mean, a team like Kentucky, who's fighting for bowl eligibility every year, and now you throw a couple more West teams in their schedule.
Yeah, it's a good point. The Kentucky and Tennessees, I think, are kind of losers in the sense that they're good. Like, I think they're both top 25-ish teams. And now, like, you're just going to get lost in the margins. Well, yeah, they could have gone 8-4, 9-3, and had a really nice year. But, like, now it's 5-5. By the way, 5-5 in the schedule is going to be a good year. Like, I hope us as a society are good enough to, like, use some relativism and realize, like, 5-5 is good. Like, if Indiana went 5-5 in the Big Ten, it would have been a good season, right? So, like, I hope we're smart enough. But, man, I think those teams, like you said, are just going to get lost a little bit.
Well, there's a point to be made with this season that, hey, the teams that are normally in the playoff are still playing, aside from Ohio State. I mean, when we get to a championship in January, if we get there, Will there be an asterisk on this season, or do you think it's still going to be? I mean, you've got Clemson, Alabama, LSU, Auburn, Oklahoma, Texas, all still playing. Notre Dame still playing. So is there still going to be kind of a question mark next to the champion this year?
Of course. I think we'd be foolish to think there wouldn't. It's the same way in like, listen, I'm a huge NBA guy, and like I've loved every second of this bubble playoffs. I've loved it, but like, and I still think whoever wins, I'm gonna remember as a winner. But we are also, no matter what, gonna remember like this was just a different context, and like it is still gonna be impressive as hell that team won an NBA title because this is actually like harder conditions in some ways, and like it's gonna be, they deserve it, whoever wins it, but it's just gonna be different. It's just going to be a different kind of challenge. And I think that's I assume how college football will end up where, first off, there's probably going to be a lot of games that are canceled and postponed. So you have that factor in there of like, man, imagine if Auburn actually played Bama, like if like, God forbid, the Iron Bowl doesn't get played, like those are the conversations we're going to be having. And I think we are still going to remember, I'm picking Alabama to win. Let's go with that. Right. We are still going to remember Alabama was the best team in college football this season. We are still going to remember that. But do I think it's going to be like remembered historically? Like we'll remember just, for example, last year's LSU? Probably not. And when you have these conversations, sure, there's going to be barroom debates about like Iowa State would have been better that year, but I don't think it's going to like stop us from in our brain and from our context historically remembering they were the best team in college football that year. I guess that's kind of a in-between answer, but that's just kind of where I stand. And the other point I was going to make, though, is like it's college football. It's the one sport that is the most used to contested championships until 2000, until like the playoff, right? There have been contested titles,
But they're
like literally
still contested.
Exactly. But that's my point, that we are used to that like ambiguity, like we literally still debate 2003, whether it's LSU or USC. And like, that's just part of it. And we like, a lot of people think USC was the champion that year. A lot of people think LSU was. Neither's wrong. So we are, if anything, used to that. And that's just like normal. I don't know. Maybe I'm wrong.
No, I think that's a very good point. We do know the champions of last year. They were LSU. They lose a lot of people like Joe Burrow and many other talented offensive and defensive players to the draft. Lose a couple of players to opting out as well. So where does this Tigers team look, or what does it look like going into week one?
Yeah, it's different. It's tricky to talk about just in the sense that you have to toe this line of, they're not going to be a championship team probably. With how much they were probably going to be a top like 6 or 7 team regardless. They were going to be good after losing Burrow and that whole group to the draft, 15 starters, all that. But it's LSU. They're still recruiting top 5 classes every year. I still love a lot of the talent on that team. So you still could have seen a scenario where like Miles Brennan's better than we thought he might be. And, things just click with Bo Pelini as the defensive coordinator. Maybe it could have came together in a conceivable world that they were a playoff team, right? Like that was still possible. Now you lose Jamar Chase, best receiver in college football, to opt out. You lose Tyler Shelvin, who I think was the best interior lineman in the SEC. And obviously some other ones, Kerry Vincent, Neil Farrell, they were co-starters or key rotation guys. Like they've had like several transfers because of different reasons. It's just kind of now you're getting to a point where I still think LSU's talented. I still think, they're still going to win 6 or 7 games. That's a pretty good year. But, man, the ceiling's just gone. And I think that's how you have to talk about it because, like, football's a weak link sport, right? I mean, and for those of our listeners who don't know, like, the weak link, strong link sport thing, basketball is a strong link sport where if you have LeBron James or Kawhi Leonard, like, you are going to be good. The strongest link actually carries more weight than the other links, while football is like soccer where it's a weak link sport. It's more about 11 guys coming together and you need – your 6 through 11 to be strong more than you do your number 1. And I bring that up to say you lose Jamar Chase, best receiver in college football. Of course you're worse, but LSU's still loaded at receiver. I mean, they still have Terrace Marshall, who I totally think could be a 1st or 2nd round pick. Racey McMath, who they love and could be a draft pick. Kayshawn Booty's going to step into that 3rd spot. He's a 5-star freshman, like he was going to be a backup, and now he still would start on like 10 SEC teams, right? So it's tricky in that sense that like their receiving core is still really strong. They're going to line up and their 3 receivers they put out there are still going to be advantage against most teams. So and the same with defensive line. That's actually another area of strength. So they've been kind of fortunate in that way that they still have Apu Aiko, who I think is going to be a stud, or Glenn Logan, who's a 4-year starter, and a bunch of top 100 freshmen coming in. They like the guys. I still think their D-line is going to be better than most offensive lines they face. And this is a long-winded way of saying, I still think even like with what they have, they still should show up and be like a 5 to 10 point favorite against at least 6 teams they play this year. And I think my prediction going in was 8-2 before all these departures. So I thought 8-2, finish like, second in the West or something, and something like that. That was my prediction. Now I still think they go 7-3, but now my chances for winning those other 2 or 3 are much lower, and that's the difference. Still think they're good, just the ceiling is different.
It's a new offense, new offensive coordinator, new quarterback. Like you said, some new weapons around the quarterback as well. Is this going to be back to that, okay, defense carries LSU and hopefully the offense can contribute type of LSU team, or are we still looking at something like last year?
Yeah, I mean, it's a good question because I think there was a point where I really did think this defense had a chance to be like one of the best in the country. I was really excited to see what a 4-3 would look like under Bo Pelini, especially with, because they switched to a 4-3 for those who don't know. And, with Tyler Shelvin and Neil Farrell on that loaded defensive line, I really thought that was going to be an elite D. Now you lose Vincent, you lose Farrell, you lose Shelvin. I still think it's going to be one of the better defenses in the SEC when you have some of the talent they have in the secondary and you have some of those linebackers. They're going to be good, but I no longer think that's going to be amazing. And the offense, even though they're losing so much, I do still think it's going to be, one of the better offenses just because, like I said, you have some of those skill players. And I didn't even mention Eric Gilbert, who's the highest rated tight end in 24/7 sports history and is a 6'5", 250-pound freak who's honestly, with Chase going, I think he's going to be the one who really now becomes an even bigger role. I think he's going to catch 50, 60 passes this year and be like an all SEC star. So you put that together, you put the fact that they finally have an offensive scheme that is pretty good and really, obviously was really good last year. And Miles Brennan's inheriting that at quarterback. I still think, even though it's not going to come close to what it was last year, I do still think this is going to be a really efficient offense. So I don't think it's going to be a defense carrying the offense kind of year just because I think the defense just got weaker, but it's just going to be a different year where, I don't think they're going to be amazing in any area, but I also don't think they're going to be bad in any area.
Well, I think you answered this question.
You cut out there. Hello?
I think I got dropped there. Hold on. Can you hear me now?
I can. Yeah. Did you lose everything?
Yeah, we're still live. So we're going to live TV. We're going to keep rolling.
Is everything still recorded and all that?
Yeah, it looks like it. Let's go like that never happened. I just have a couple more questions for
We're pros.
Yeah. In the SEC as a whole, I mean, obviously, if you're going to name your favorites, it's the 2 in each division, Alabama, LSU, Georgia, Florida. Is there someone, and like I said, I think you might have answered this already with A&M, but is there someone that's dangerous outside those top 4 that could make a run at the title?
I think the only one that's genuinely dangerous is A&M. I really like A&M. Again, I'm like an overly analytic kind of football guy sometimes. And I think depth is something way more important than, sometimes people realize. And I like an experienced team a lot. And I think A&M is really good in all those categories. Plus their talent level is really high. I mean, I don't think Kellen Mond's going to be a superstar, and he's one of those people. He's one of the most polarizing quarterbacks in football, but he's a 3-year starter who's had some pretty great moments. And I think Joe Burrow, for example, is evidence that sometimes it just clicks at a certain time. So I think A&M could be really good. I think the schedule, they were going to be my sneaky, man, I think they actually could be in the playoff. With the schedule change and all that, I probably reduced that a little bit, but I like A&M. That's probably it. Auburn is always capable. And I think Auburn's talent on defense is still nasty and still could be really good. There's a chance. I mean, I'm not actually picking this or anything like that, but I really like Bo Nix, and I like now Chad Morris, their offensive coordinator, who obviously is one of the better offensive minds in the game. Head coach of Arkansas, offensive coordinator in the Clemson era, first championship run. I think there's a chance that the Bo Nix, Chad Morris marriage actually makes that offense pop, and that might be the best comparison for who could possibly have a Joe Burrow LSU breakout year. So there's a chance that clicks and they're really, really good, but there's also a chance that they are just really above average and not great. So I wouldn't by any means pick that, but yeah, that's really the only ones. I love Kentucky. You mentioned them earlier. I love them. I think they're really deep and really talented. I like Tennessee quite a bit, but I just don't see any chance they're really title contender types.
So you're saying Auburn is going to be the Auburn of every year, except for the Cam Newton year.
Hey, the difference is, I think like the last 2 years, I think Auburn probably had the best defense in football last year. I think like Auburn was nasty and just had a hell schedule and a freshman quarterback and an offense that didn't really make sense for him.
Don't we say every year that they have the toughest schedule? I swear
they really do have a tough schedule. It's Auburn and A&M. I mean, it's been like Auburn's schedule is really tough. They deserve credit for that. Like you deserve, but it's just like, man, that sucks because like they beat Oregon, they won their big non-conf, but like, and then like they just lost so many games in like these brutal fashions. It's like one of my favorite tidbits is like you ask every LSU staffer, and keep in mind they played 7 top 10 teams or 7 top 10 teams last year. It was crazy. And you ask every single one who the toughest team they played was last year, and you would think they'd say Clemson or Bama, and almost everyone says Auburn, and I find that fascinating. So I know we're on a tangent that doesn't matter, but I'm just
that's okay. I like that.
I'm just like, yeah. So I think Auburn is just fascinating that like it's kind of like LSU, which is that if they get their offense to really click with Bo Nix, the upside's crazy. But we'll see.
It's kind of like the kick 6 year where they had the tough schedule, but everything went right.
Yes.
And
last year didn't.
They've had these tough schedules and everything's gone wrong.
It's a good point. Yeah.
I guess my last question to you before I let you go, today is September 9th. If you had to make a prediction here on September 9th, does college football finish a full season and crown a national champion in January?
Yeah, my answer is yes. And it's not even, I think it's going to get there pretty hobbled and wounded and beaten, but I stand by my thing I said earlier, which is like, I just feel like they're going to roll on and, it's going to get ugly at times. Like you're going to see a lot of major postponements and cancellations. I think you're going to see a lot of like, there might even be some scary medical stuff that really happens in the next few months. And I hope not, but I think that I kind of think it will for just using, evidence overall, but I just think they're accepting that. They're going in knowing these are going to happen. They're going knowing there's going to be postponements, and I just think they're going to roll on, and it might be a really ugly finish, but for their purposes, getting to that finish, it doesn't matter how pretty it is. It's just the fact that you're getting the TV money every week, and you're getting some of those ticket revenue and all that. So I am at the point where I think they will finish the season. It just might be really ugly.
I hope so. I hope we have something to watch, even if it's not Big Ten football. Just give us something. And I completely agree. I think the powers that be will make it happen.
Okay, how about you doing an SEC schedule? Go 10-game season. What's the record?
Well, are they in the East or the West?
You know what? Let's be nice. We'll say East. Yeah.
Okay. I think they could beat Vanderbilt, Missouri.
Missouri, yeah.
Kentucky and Tennessee would be good games, very good competitive
You
games.
Assume you go 1-1 in there, right? Like you can maybe pull off one.
With the talent Indiana has this year, yes. And I think they'd be really ticked off about Tennessee from the Gator Bowl. So they'd be
good call. Yeah.
There's 3. Then you got to play Georgia and Florida, which I think are both
those are losses.
So now you're 3-3.
And then you're
looking at, what is that? Is that everybody in the East?
That's everybody in the East. South Carolina. That's a good one. I think they are better than South Carolina, but
that one would depend home or away. I think.
Yeah.
I think home they get them. I'm going to give them that one. So that's 4. Then
it just depends who your cross conferences, I guess.
They'd have to steal one cross conference if they could play one of the Mississippi schools. I think that'd be huge because they're not beaten in A&M, LSU, Alabama, or Auburn.
Probably not. No.
There it is. A&M's the only one. Because I'm not high on Kellen Mond like everyone.
I don't blame anyone for not being high on him. Yeah.
I'm sick of hearing how good Kellen Mond is, and he does the same thing.
You're not wrong. You're not wrong.
Okay, so I
think we go 5-5 because you got to let rule of averages. Yeah.
If they're in the Kentucky, Tennessee type of East standing, I think they could.
Which would be huge. That would shut a lot of people up. Yeah.
I was hoping for 6 in a 10-game Big Ten season. So
I saw the possibilities for sure. Yeah, I thought
was
6.
There, but we'll see what it looks like whenever it happens. What do you think? When does Big Ten football happen?
I just don't think spring can happen. I
don't either.
Too many people I've talked to are like, there's just no way.
So you can't do spring and fall. There's no way. You can't go bang bang like that.
I still don't think they changed their decision. So I think at the end of the day, it just doesn't go till next fall, but I'm not too well read up on the latest there. So Thanksgiving does sound possible. I don't know. What about you?
I don't know if January is too late to start it and you go January to March. That's walking a fine line. And they'd have to play a lot of games in like Lucas Oil Stadium and these indoor places. So I don't know. I don't know what the logistics are, but Scott Dolson talked last night and he said they are doing everything they can to get it started up. So we'll see. That's very, very blanket, vague statement.
Yeah, it's a good statement. Yeah.
We'll see. I'm hopeful that maybe something will happen, but I'm just kind of like, okay, bring on the NFL, bring on the SEC, and we'll enjoy those.
Yeah, I guess that's all you can do. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, Brody, thanks so much for joining us again. Appreciate your insight. Best of luck to you this season. Stay safe and healthy, and we'll talk soon.
Anytime, man. Absolutely. Same to you, and good luck with living a college life without normalcy. Yeah. Good luck with L201.
Yeah. Thanks. Thanks, Brody. Take care.
Yeah, thanks.
That was Brody Miller, The Athletic, joining us, talking all things LSU and SEC football. Always appreciate Brody coming on and talking about my class schedule there at the end. Love that. But yeah, he brings up some good points. Can spring football happen followed by fall football? I just don't think so. That's my opinion. The question is, if you start in January, is that spring? If you can go January to March, a 10-game season, and play a Big Ten championship and give them April, May, and June off, I don't know. I'm thankfully not the one making these decisions, but it does look like the SEC and what we heard from Brody today, they are full steam ahead, trying to figure something out and how to make that season work. So hopefully we will have some college football. We already have some college football, but some higher level college football coming up here toward the end of the month when the ACC, the SEC, the Big 12 start getting things going again. That'll wrap things up here for our Wednesday episode. A reminder, on Friday, Brian Bennett, a college basketball writer for The Athletic, will be joining us normal time, 10 a.m. on Friday. Good show lined up for you there. Again, you can watch all of our episodes on our IU Sports Media YouTube page, or you can check out any of our previous episodes. If you can't watch and you need a podcast, they're available wherever you get your podcasts under Unpaid Interns. Huge thank you to Brody Miller for joining us again today, his second appearance on the show. I think we could say just as good, if not better, than the first appearance. Thanks again to Brody for joining us. For Brody, I'm Austin Render, saying so long from today's episode of Unpaid Interns. We'll see you on Friday.